Hey there, this is Erica from Ever Educating, and welcome to the October live stream. I'm hoping it actually lasts the whole time, considering it's storming right now at my house, but fingers crossed that the internet will hold. Today's theme is the top insights from the research I've been doing into instructional design. And so obviously this channel is mainly teaching tips for new college instructors. So I am going to focus on how it applies to teaching college. But near the end, I'll give some information to those of you who might want to transition into ID rather than teaching in the college classroom. So that's basically what we have today. I'm going to go ahead and switch to the view of seeing my screen so we can kind of discuss, basically what I thought I'd do is one thing I really like about instructional design is that there's so many like models and theories that are really infographic friendly is how I'll put it. So if we go here and we see, for example, the foundational theory that you really want to know for instructional design is the ADDIE model, ADDIE. And so here, if you just Google ADDIE model, you'll get all these images because, again, infographic friendly. But I'll go ahead and open this one since it has a bit of words on it in addition to what ADDIE means. And I do have a blog post about this in a video in case you want more information later on. But this is, I think, the key one to consider when you're designing your classes because it goes through the 5 steps of designing an educational experience. And so you begin with analysis. So analyzing, who are your students? What's the class situation? Is it online? Is it in person? Is it blended? Is it synchronous? Is it asynchronous? Are the students freshmen or freshmen through seniors? Are they majors or non-majors, right? And so you really analyze what's going on in your classroom or what will be going on, who are people, relevant to the situation. And then knowing that, then you start designing your course. And so that's the first D is design. And so at this point, you think, okay, let me design, what are my learning objectives for the course? What types of activities do I want to have? What are my major projects going to be? Am I going to be doing a lot of lecturing or is it going to be mostly discussion based? What are going to be my required texts for them to read or watch, right? So you start designing your course. And once you have that, then you start the second D, which is development, right? Creating the assignment sheets, creating the lecture material, creating the PowerPoints, and so on. So those are the first 3 ones. And then you get into actually implementing it. So actually assigning, right? Actually teaching, actually lecturing. And then the last one is E, evaluation. So this can be student evals at the end of the semester, but can also be maybe a midterm chat where halfway through you evaluate how things are going and make changes accordingly. Or it could be, evaluating, asking your students with exit cards, hey, what are your thoughts on this assignment? Do you think this activity went well? What do you want to do next, right? And getting a sense of how you can improve as the semester goes on. So in this case, the ADDIE model is considered very structured, very linear in its historical setting. But nowadays, I consider this to be a very iterative process where, yes, you analyze the situation as you go in, and you start designing, of course, before the semester begins. You need a syllabus, you need a course schedule, that kind of stuff. But in developing, yeah, you want to have some of that developed before the semester begins, but maybe the third project assignment sheet isn't done yet when week 1 begins because you want to get a sense of how your students are doing before you start designing things later in the semester. And so in that case, you start doing the development, throughout implementing rather than all the way at the beginning and then not going back to it. That's something to consider. That's why they have like this other model, which is called SAM. And so in this case, if you kind of go and see here, what you're going to use. Let's try this infographic for SAM. And so SAM stands for the Successive Approximation Model. And in this case, it's designed to be iterative, right? So rather than ADDIE, which some consider to be very linear, in this version, it's okay, you're going to do the preparation phase. So you're going to look at the background information. Again, that analysis is still happening here. But then you start creating things quickly. Maybe you start brainstorming ideas and you start designing them and you create a prototype, right? A prototype assignment sheet, a prototype activity that you will happen through each unit, a prototype PowerPoint. And then you review it. Maybe with your cohort members, with your mentor, whoever the case may be. And you kind of go through this iterative process of design where you improve things as you go along. So like, okay, I designed one PowerPoint, I implemented it, didn't really work well. Let's do it again. Let's revise it this time, And so you do that design phase over and over again, and also the development phase over and over again. So as you see here, okay, I developed this, I implemented it, I have it evaluated. I asked my students what they thought, I asked my coworker, I asked my mentor, hey, this is how it went, what are your thoughts, how can I improve it? And you change accordingly. So this one is a lot more fluid in the sense of you're always seeing how you can improve what you're designing and what you're implementing. And, in my case, I see ADDIE as being iterative if you want it to be. So I'm not someone who follows SAM necessarily to the same degree. I am a bigger fan of ADDIE, but this can work well, especially if you're creating like physical things in your classroom. So maybe you're teaching glass blowing, right? Or maybe you're teaching yoga. Well, in that case, maybe creating prototypes makes sense. Hey, here's a prototype yoga session. Here's a prototype glass blowing activity, right? And then seeing, okay, how can I improve it from there? I think the kinesthetic learning could really be, this could be useful for that versus I think in my case, teaching English, teaching composition and literature, I like ADDIE. But I think it's important to know that these are the two, I would say, the two main foundational models of creating curriculum, creating an educational experience. So kind of moving on from there, another big element of ID is kind of figuring out, how are you going to design something, right? What are you thinking as far as, in this case, in Bloom's taxonomy, the new version, the revised version, what are you having students do, right? And so if you see down here, it starts from the bottom and then it gets more difficult as you move up. And so the first stage here, the first level is remembering, right? So can your students remember the facts that you are giving them? So maybe in my case, hey, here's the terminology, and can you remember the definition of it? And you move up, understanding. Okay, you can repeat to me what the definition is, but do you understand what that actually means, right? And so you can kind of move up to applying. Okay, give me an example of how metafiction applies to this book we just read, right? Give me an example of how characterization applies to this particular novel or short story. And so that's the next level there of like, okay, you remember what the definition is of this term, you understand what it means, and you can apply it to a situation. And then you keep on going. So next is analyzing, right? Like, okay, now I want you to analyze the characterization in this novel versus that novel, right? What connections can you make here? What are you seeing? Similarities, differences? How are they building differently, right? And so you bring that to a more extreme level, not just apply, but analyze the complexity of the situation. And then you go up to evaluating. Okay, well, now we're going to do an evaluation. We're going to examine the characterization of all the novels you read in this class or all of the short stories, right? And we're going to see, okay, well, how can we consider what characterization works well, which characterization doesn't work well? How did they do this? Do we have author research and information that we can apply here, right? And then creating. Maybe write your own short story where characterization is the key element that you should be focused on in your creative writing, right? And so in this case, this is really popular, Bloom's taxonomy, because it has a sense of, okay, what is the learning outcome that you want your students to achieve in a given activity or over the course of the semester? So what I like about this one in particular is that you can kind of give this to one activity. So you can say, okay, in the major project, first they have to remember these terms and they have to understand them and to be able to apply them. They have to analyze a certain example of them, right? And then they have to evaluate the use of it in this particular context. And then after that, create maybe a presentation where they teach it themselves to somebody else, right? Or they do their own example. They create their own example of this concept that we've been discussing. And so you can have one assignment that has all these levels. But then you can also do this across a semester. Okay, the first thing we're going to practice is remembering the terminology. Here are activities that the focus is remember these terms. Okay, now we move on. Now these activities are going to be about making sure you actually understood what these terms mean now that you know the definitions. Okay, now here are activities where you apply them, right? And so you kind of go through the whole semester, starting with activities that do specific elements of this taxonomy. So you can have one assignment that does multiple, or you can have one by one by one by one. And of course, you don't necessarily have to go through the whole taxonomy in one course. So maybe you're the prerequisite for a whole series of courses. And really what students have to do in your course is remember and understand terminology, right? Maybe you're in a science class, right? Or maybe you have to remember, understand, and be able to apply it. And that's all you need to do in this 101 class. In 102, now it's your analyzing situation, right? And so you kind of get a sense of which ones do I want to do or which ones do I need to do, and how am I going to assign them in a one assignment or multiple assignments throughout the semester. So that's one that's really helpful as well. Again, great infographic that you can use. Now, another one that I really like is Gagnes' 9 events. So in this case, it's about how to design an instructional experience to actually be efficient and effective with your students, right, or with the learners. And so in this case, here's another infographic where you have the 9 stages. And so starting from the beginning, when you're creating an activity or creating a course, the first thing you want to do is gain the attention of the learners, right? So, if you're teaching a required gen ed course, your students are forced to be there, right? So you want to consider, okay, how can I make sure that they're paying attention, that they're invested in what I'm teaching them? Maybe you have something that's really relevant to them that you have them do, right? So maybe in my case, okay, well, we're learning writing. Let me gain your attention by how this writing is super important in the situation. Don't you want to make sure that you can do this too, right? So first step, gain attention. And then tell them what the objective is, right? So this is really key to have them know, okay, what do I want you to achieve at the end of this course? It's this. Here's our primary objective and maybe some secondary objectives. That's the goal. That should be your focus, right? Because if they don't know that, then they're like, oh, maybe the focus is like creative writing. No, it's not. It's research, right? So you want to make sure you tell them what the whole point of the course is. Or if you're thinking assignment-wise, tell them what the point of the assignment is. Okay. And then the third one is stimulating recall of prior knowledge, right? So, okay, well, you have to create this paper, right? And here's a reason why this paper is important. Here's what the outcome of this paper is supposed to be. Now, all right, well, when have you written papers before or written academic writing before? How can you apply to this situation, right? So you let them know, remind them, hey, this is not starting from scratch. Let's see what prior knowledge you have here that you can connect to this assignment. And then you actually present the content. Okay, all right, here is what you need to know in order to do this paper, right? So here are the steps that you need. Here's the content. Here's the terminology you need to know. This is like the meat of it, right? In order to achieve the actual assignment, you need to know this content. And then provide learning guidance. Okay, so you know what you need to do. Here's step-by-step of achieving this paper. Here's a resource you can use for MLA. Here's a resource you can use for the structure of your paper. Here's a resource for creating an outline, right? So giving them guidance in achieving that activity. And then obviously a listening performance. Okay, write the first draft of your introduction. Write your first supportive paragraph, right? Write your outline. Whatever the case may be here, actually have them create something so that you can collect it and provide feedback. Okay, introduction, great job. It really made sense where you're going with this paper. Or, you know what, your introduction has no thesis. Is that going to be your next paragraph, or did you forget about thesis? Right? I'm not sure how your background information relates to what you say you're going to be arguing in this paper. So you give them feedback and you assess the performance, right? So, at this point, this paragraph is an A paragraph, right? Or it's a B+ paragraph. It's a C- paragraph. Whatever the case may be, so that they can improve before the last assignment is due, right? The actual full thing is due. And then enhancing retention and transfer. So once the assignment is over, right, and you do those steps again, providing feedback and assessment of the final product, at this point, you really want to spend some time and say, okay, well, how can we make sure that you're going to actually retain what you learned about research, what you learned about MLA, what you learned about outlining, okay? And how can you see, can you understand that you can transfer this knowledge to other situations? It's not just in our writing class. How can you transfer this to your science classes, to your math classes, to your anthropology classes, to your work, right? Whatever the case may be. So 9 events here that you want to kind of see, all right, do my assignments go through these? Does my course in general go through these as well? Okay, so really like this. It's kind of really helpful to have like an exact structure of like, okay, check it, check it, check it. Okay, my assignment is good to go. All right, moving on. Let's wait till this loads. Okay, so this one, I think I have a video about this too that I've linked below. And so this is the Kirkpatrick's levels of evaluation. And as I mentioned in that video, I don't necessarily think that all levels work well for one given course, but I do want to briefly mention it because it is a major part of ADDIE. And so levels 1 and 2 definitely can occur in your classroom. And so level 1 is the reaction level, right? So how do participants feel about the training program, or in your case, about your course or about your activity? So you actually ask them maybe a little survey, anonymous survey you have them do, where they give you their feelings about the assignment or the course. Did they learn something? Did they struggle with something? Did they really enjoy something? Did they really not enjoy something? What's their immediate reaction, right? And then the learning, to what extent did they actually improve in their knowledge and skills that they were supposed to improve on? So in this case, you would see that from what they turned in, right? So did they do great on the assignments, right? Did they start an assignment with some confusion, but at the end, they actually ended up boosting their grade from what you anticipated when you saw the introduction when they turned in their final paper, right? Did they actually learn what they were to learn in their class? That's the second level of evaluation. And you have behavior, right? To what extent did they change their behavior based on the educational experience? So in this case, you might see this, throughout units. Maybe, okay, unit 1 was a paper and they got a B, and unit 2, they got a B plus, and unit 3, they got an A, right? Okay, so now you've seen that whatever they did, it obviously has improved, that they're doing things in their behavior better than they did in the beginning, right? They're a stronger researcher, they're a stronger writer, or whatever the case may be. And then the fourth level is results, right? So are you seeing the benefits of the training in your students? This, I would say, you'd see more if you had them again in a future semester, right? Because then you could say, oh, wow, I remember where they started, and now I have them again 2 years later, and they're using all these skills they learned in my class, plus others, in this particular assignment. Obviously, the results are there for the student. You can see this on a micro level at the end of the semester, right? Again, maybe thinking of the grades or seeing paper 1 versus paper 3. But I think it's more like, did they actually transfer this knowledge outside of your classroom? Did they apply it in other ways? That kind of thing. So maybe if you teach a series of courses, then you could do this level of evaluation as well. Okay, so these are the 4 levels. 1 and 2, the most common. And if you're thinking of ID in corporate world, from what I've researched, 1 and 2 are still what's focused on most of the time. But also 3 and 4 gives you more complex and more interesting results to kind of really see, is what you're creating effective to your learners. Okay. Now, one thing to consider is that a big part of ID is adult learning theories. And there are different ones, but from what I gather in my research, constructivism is the one that's most popular by far and away. So in this case, you really have this element of how do students learn a material? And so there's behaviorism is another one, right? Where it's more okay, you have to actually have them do scenarios where they behave in the way that they should behave after the training, right? Create habits that they'll actually be able to take and transfer to the situation at hand once they leave their training. And so it's all about how can we make sure that this habit is created, right? That I think is a kind of nutshell of that kind of theory. But in this case, this one's more popular, constructivism, because, and I like this article a lot because it really has that bullet points, okay? So what is this about? Well, knowledge is constructed, right? People learn to learn as they learn, okay? So when you're teaching students, they might not know how to learn something because they haven't had to do it before at a level that you're asking them to do, or in a course that they hadn't had to take, in high school, or whatever the case may be. So you have to teach them how to learn, right? It's kind of connected to my video on teach them how to take notes, right? Teach them how to annotate a reading, because once they know that, they can't really gain as much, retain as much as you might like, right? Learning is an active process, okay? So you actually have to have them do things in order for them to learn. It's not just sitting there and listening to you. Have them act, right? So learning is a social activity. Don't just have them act individually. Do small group projects, large group projects, presentations where they have to teach their classmates about something and do some Q&A, right? It's not something that should be done individually only, because they can really learn when there's a social element to it. It's contextual, right? So it's not just memorize these facts, it's apply them, right? Thinking back to Bloom's taxonomy, right? Think about the situation in which we're learning this. Think about your audience when you're writing a piece, for your class, okay? Where the case may be there. Knowledge is personal. Tie it into your personal values, your personal interests, right? In my case, when I teach writing, write this paper, it's a research paper, but you can choose your topic. What interests you, right, about society? What interests you about sports? What interests you about this thing? Use that as inspiration, as motivation to learn because you have personal connection to it, right? Learning exists in the mind, right? So hand-on experience are necessary, but you also have to have this element of like engaging in connection between ideas, right? It's not just memorize these things, you get to see the connections between them, how they're a web of knowledge, a web of information that tie into each other, that affect each other, right? And then motivation is key to learning. So we hear this a lot as educators, but it's not just like do this because I'm forcing you to. There has to be a reason to do it. And I would say a reason besides just getting a good grade, right? How can you motivate your students to actually want to learn what you're teaching them? So I really do like this element of adult learning theory. I think it could definitely apply in the college classroom. They're 18-year-olds, or older, so they are adults, and give a sense of like how you can design an activity with this in mind, right? How can you make sure that they're actually doing the behavior? How can you make sure there's a social element? How can you make sure they're making connections between ideas? So I do think this is a good one to do some research on, but it's definitely important if you want to become an instructional designer. Okay, so I'm going to shift here because it's already, we're already over 20 minutes in. So this particular website, so this particular man, Addi Peck, highly recommend looking at his stuff if you want to become an ID, right? So up to this point, it's how you apply it to your college classroom. But if you're here because you want to become an instructional designer, his website is fantastic. I've been using it a lot myself. And he has this particular post, which I've linked below, called How to Become One in 2021, right? And so he has other resources here that you can look at, his portfolio that you can see as well. But one thing I wanted to point out here, for those of you who, again, are interested in the career itself, is he kind of goes through, important elements to know about instructional design. So corporate versus higher ed IDs, for example. And then if you go down here, self-employed versus full-time, being hired as an employee. And he goes through some really important theories that you should know to make sure that you have. Right over here, ADDIE, again, is the first one, as you would expect. Here's Gagnes. Keep on going down. There's other ones I did not mention here. So action mapping. So this one is a really great source. But if you keep going down, one thing I wanted to point out is that he talks about tools, important tools for instructional designers. And so the top one is Articulate Storyline. So Articulate 360 is an expensive tool, right? But it has different elements to it. And you can do a 60-day free trial. That's what I'm currently doing. And you can teach yourself the tool if you haven't used it before. Because this one and Adobe Captivate seem to be the most popular ones for curating e-learning experiences. But this one has one as far as the most popular one. So if you only have time to learn one right now, I would recommend Articulate rather than Captivate, just because it seems to be more popular for these jobs. But he does go through other ones as well. So there's an Articulate. Here we have Adobe, right? And then you go on and you can kind of see, do you have this technology or can you gain it if you want to try to find work in this particular career. Camtasia is another big one for screen recording and that kind of thing. So if you go through this one, you'll see tons of information here about becoming an ID. And again, there's other elements on here as well. So it's a great resource for those who want to go into the career. But another one that I really want to recommend, so I took a Coursera course about ID over the summer, and I really enjoyed it. But, obviously there are other ways of learning about ID. You can just do it by researching. Google can be your best friend. But if you do have access to the premium version of LinkedIn, there's LinkedIn Learning. And if you don't have the premium version, I recommend looking through your public library, because I think some public libraries have access to LinkedIn Learning as well that you can use. But in this case, if you do have access to it, you can actually search for instructional design courses if you go to the course element, the LinkedIn Learning. And they have here two different paths. One path is becoming an instructional designer, right? And if you go through, I've already done this one. So you start with the basics, then you start with needs analysis, that first element of ADDIE. Storyboarding is a huge element of instructional design that I think a lot of us don't do as college instructors. We don't actually storyboard what our course will look like. We just maybe outline it and start creating it, or we just go straight into creating. That's an important one to kind of look into. But you can kind of go through here and get a sense of, the job. Working with SMEs or SMEs, subject matter experts, is a big element of this career as well. And so there's this path, and there's also one, become, I think, an instructional developer is another path as well that's very connected to it. And so you can just watch this on your own time, take notes, and really learn about this particular aspect of education, instruction, training. So that's something to consider as well. So I'm going to go back and see if you have any questions that you want to ask. Now is the time before I switch off here. But I do think that if you are someone, let me go back over here. So if you are someone, oh, my hair has gone crazy. Oh, well. If you're someone who is interested in instructional design, I'm creating a playlist of videos where I'm going over different theories. So far, I've already done a few. I've done ADDIE already. I've done the Kirkpatrick one already as well, creating a learning outcome using the ADDIE model. And I'll be doing more as we go along because I'm learning this and I think it really applies to the college situation. But if you have any questions right now, you can go ahead and let me know in the comments and I will answer as soon as I can. I don't see any coming up here in the live chat. So I'm going to end it on this note. And then again, this is the October live stream. We have November and December left. So like usual in the community, I will post a poll to see what you want the theme to be for next month's live stream. And if you're not a subscriber yet, I recommend doing that so you don't miss out on the videos coming up. And if you are new to this channel, I really recommend taking a look around. I have almost 200 videos about teaching on here. So there's plenty to help you if you're new on that journey. All right, I'll see you next time.